governance. Kabatti, getting to know about governance is very important. Okay, and obviously tomorrow, you got to understand your government, kada? You want to understand how your government works. You got to understand how or what should be the important things that you should keep in mind when you are a part of bureaucracy, isn't it? So, we'll try to get to know something about how the government operates, what are the important principles, and how governments had evolved. Okay, the nature of government had evolved. When you study Indian polity, you understand government to include legislature, executive, and judiciary. So when you study Indian polity, you understand government to include these three organs of the government, isn't it? Legislature, executive, and judiciary. Okay, so as a part of polity, you study how the legislature works, how the parliament works. Okay, you answer questions about parliament, like account for the following standards of debates in Indian parliament. Question. Okay, do you think that presidential form of government is better suited to India? Question. Examine the nature of committee system in Indian parliament. Do you think committee system is working well to ensure accountability? Question. Itlantivi. Okay. Legislature. As a part of Indian polity, you study about legislature, you study about executive, you study about judiciary. Okay. Now, executive is about what's called as implementation of laws. Right? If you remember, we discussed once in the class that a legislature is supposed to have a very important quality. What is the quality of legislature? A law-making body should have a specific quality. What is that? It should be a representative institution. Kabatte, we elect members to our legislature. We elect our MLAs who make laws for us. We elect our MPs kada. Mana recent ga Lok Sabha elections lo meerandaru vote lesaru kada. Okay? Right. So we elect our lawmakers. So a law-making body should have the most important quality of being a representative body. Kabatti Indian Parliament is not only the highest law-making body, it is also the highest representative body in this country. The highest representative body in this country is our Parliament. Okay, so that is the most important quality of a legislature. Right. This is for the purpose of law-making. The second organ of the government is called as executive. The primary function of executive is implementation of laws. Implementation of the laws made by legislature. And you know that executive consists of two parts. The first one is called as the political executive. Predominantly executive across the entire world, in whatever the type of government, is all about implementation of laws. Prapanchaptanga ekkadunna kuda. Okay, it is about implementation of the laws. And executive, as I told you, consists of two parts. One is called as political executive. Okay, and you know that political executive consists of MLAs, MPs, legislature, sir. It consists of Council of Ministers. It consists of President, Vice President, Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. They are part of political executive. Okay, they occupy office for a specific term for implementation of an agenda approved by people. Okay, right. So they have a very clear-cut political program. Okay, clear-cut political program valakundi, right? A lot of people tend to mistake government to mean political executive. ఇవాళ స్టేట్లో ఏ గవర్నమెంట్ ఉంది? కాంగ్రెస్ గవర్నమెంట్ ఉంది. ఓకే, స్టేట్లో సార్, స్టేట్లో కాంగ్రెస్ గవర్నమెంట్ ఉంది కదా. మీరు ఏ స్టేట్? రైట్, ఎందుకంటే ఆంధ్రలో ఎన్డీఏ గవర్నమెంట్ ఉంది, కూటమి. ఓకే, సో ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్ మీన్స్ పొలిటికల్ ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్. చాలామంది అనుకుంటారండి, కాబట్టి చాలామంది గవర్నమెంట్ అంటే కూడా ఇప్పుడు కాంగ్రెస్ గవర్నమెంట్ అంటున్నారు కదా, కాంగ్రెస్ గవర్నమెంట్ అంటే 3 అంగాలు ఉంటాయని చెప్పుకున్నాం కదా ఇప్పుడే. బట్ యూ సెయింగ్ కొంతమంది అయితే మరీ ఘోరం, రేవంత్ రెడ్డి గవర్నమెంట్ ఉంది అంటారు, యూనో. But government actually includes these 3 things. But a good number of people think government as only political executive. It consists of our president, central aithe, president, vice president and council of ministers. The specific thing about this political executive is that they occupy office for a specific term. Oka nirdishtamaina kala parimiti. Isn't it? You have voted in the elections, right? What did you look for when you voted in the elections? Yeah? Manifesto, isn't it? So people ought to look for, supposed to look at the manifesto before they vote in the elections. Okay? మీరు ఓట్లు వేసారా మేడం? ఏ పార్టీకి వేసారు? చెప్పాల్సిన అవసరం లేదు కానీ ఓకే, ఏం చూసి ఓటేసారండి? ఏంటి బీఆర్ఎస్ విధానం ఏంటి? మేనిఫెస్టో చూసాను అంటున్నారు కదా, చూసారా? చూడలేదు, చూడకుండానే వేస్తారు అనమాట. వీఆర్ సపోజ్డ్ టు లుక్ ఎట్ ద మేనిఫెస్టో బిఫోర్ వీ ఓట్ ఇన్ ద ఎలక్షన్స్, ఇజంట్ ఇట్? ఓకే, కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీ వస్తే మహిళలు ఫ్రీగా బస్సుల్లో తిరగొచ్చు అని అనిపించింది అనుకోండి, కాంగ్రెస్ పార్టీకి ఓటేయచ్చు అనమాట, యూనో, రైట్? సో వీ ఆర్ సపోజ్ లుక్ ఎట్ ద మేనిఫెస్టో. అండ్ ఎలక్షన్స్ తర్వాత ఏ పార్టీ మేనిఫెస్టోకి అయితే మెజారిటీ సపోర్ట్ దక్కిందో that manifesto becomes the agenda or political program of the government. So political executive is that part of executive which continues to hold office for a specific term and with a definite political program or agenda approved by people. That is called as political executive. And they have a definite political program and agenda approved by people. This is called as political executive. The second part of executive is called permanent executive. The second part of executive is called permanent executive. And you know what this is, isn't it? This is what we normally call as bureaucracy. It's called as bureaucracy. Or the civil servants. They're called as the civil servants.
Specific time period.
Denik sir?
35 years.
35 years ఏంటి?
Bureaucracy has 35 years of time limit.
ఎవరు చెప్పారు? ఎవరన్నారు సార్?
అంటే ఇప్పుడు సివిల్ సర్వెంట్స్ అంటారు. వాళ్ళకి పర్మనెంట్ పోస్టింగ్ 35 years అని చెప్పి
ప్రపోజల్ ఉండొచ్చు. ఓకే, దే ఆర్ పర్మనెంట్. ఇట్స్ మీన్స్ దాట్ దే డు నాట్ హ్యావ్ ఎనీ స్పెసిఫిక్ టర్మ్. సార్ చెప్పినట్టుగా ఏమైనా ప్రపోజల్ ఉండొచ్చు, బట్ దే ఆక్యుపై ఆఫీస్ యాజ్ ఎ మ్యాటర్ ఆఫ్ కెరీర్. ఓకే, రైట్. Tomorrow, if you get selected to group 1, you are a part of executive and you are a part of bureaucracy, that is permanent executive. And what do you think is the most important quality that you should have? Tomorrow, if you are going to be the officers, what do you think should be the most important quality that you should? Don't tell me honesty and dedication. Ivi government officers ke kaadu andarki undali, obviously. Specific ga గవర్నమెంట్ ఆఫీసర్స్కి బ్యూరోక్రసీలో భాగంగా ఉన్నటువంటి సిబ్బందికి ఉండాల్సిన మోస్ట్ ఇంపార్టెంట్ క్వాలిటీ, వాట్ డూ యూ థింక్ ఇట్ ఈస్? దట్స్ కాల్డ్ as పొలిటికల్ న్యూట్రాలిటీ. పొలిటికల్ న్యూట్రాలిటీ. ఓకే, ఇట్ మీన్స్ యు ఆర్ నాట్ సపోజ్డ్ టు హ్యావ్ ఎనీ partiality towards any political outfit or a political ideology. You are supposed to be politically neutral. Kabate public servants are prohibited from displaying their political preferences or giving political speeches or publicly making political announcements. నేను ఆ పార్టీ, నేను ఈ పార్టీ అని మీరు చెప్పకూడదు. ఏమైనా ఉంటే ఇప్పుడే చేసేసుకోవచ్చు. ఓకే, గవర్నమెంట్ ఆఫీసర్ అయిన తర్వాత you are not supposed to display your political preferences or your political affiliations. You are supposed to be politically neutral. Okay, that's the most important quality, right? లేదు నాకు కేసీఆర్ అంటేనే ఇష్టం, కాబట్టి ఈ రేవంత్ రెడ్డి గవర్నమెంట్లో నేను పనిచేయను అని అనడానికి వీల్లేదు, మర్యాదగా పనిచేయాల్సిందే. ఓకే, ఏ రాజకీయ పార్టీ అధికారంలో ఉంటే రాగద్వేషాలకి అతీతంగా మీరు ఆ రాజకీయ పార్టీ ఎజెండాని ఇంప్లిమెంట్ చేయాలి. దాన్నే పొలిటికల్ న్యూట్రాలిటీ, రాజకీయ తటస్థత అని చెప్పి పిలుస్తారు. దట్స్ ద మోస్ట్ ఇంపార్టెంట్ క్వాలిటీ దట్ ఎ బ్యూరోక్రాట్ షుడ్ హ్యావ్, పొలిటికల్ న్యూట్రాలిటీ. ఓకే, నవ్ as a part of polity you study the working of the government including legislature, executive and judiciary. As a part of governance you focus on the working of executive. That is the focus of your study in governance, obviously. Okay, and the work that is actually done by the executive is called public administration. Okay, public administration. Okay, so this is the focus of our study of governance, right? We tend to concentrate on how administration is carried on. Okay, how the policies are being formulated, right? What are the duties which are being taken up by the government? How the nature of government had changed, right? So ikkada when we mean government, just understand that we are focusing on executive. Okay, that's the primary focus, right? Now you know that over a period of time our ideas have changed, our ideas of government have changed. Okay, we wanted to have government today which is very committed to delivery of services. Okay, we wanted government to take up a lot of welfare schemes to lend a helping hand to the needy and the downtrodden. We required different kinds of commitments from the government today. Okay, కాబట్టి మారుతున్నటువంటి సమాజంలో మారుతున్న ఆశయాలకి, ఆస్పిరేషన్స్కి అనుగుణంగా గవర్నమెంట్లో కూడా మార్పులు వస్తూ వచ్చాయి. ఓకే, గవర్నమెంట్ ఆల్సో స్టార్టెడ్ టు చేంజ్, ఓకే, బేస్డ్ ఆన్ ద చేంజెస్ దట్ occurred in the society. Okay, so as a part of our study of governance we should start by understanding how the concept of governance had evolved. That's the first question, how the concept of governance had evolved over a period of time. Okay, the first and the most important question probably in the topic related to governance is the evolution of the concept of governance, how it had evolved. Okay, now you know that initially when governments were established, we said that the powers of the government were divided into three organs: legislature, executive and judiciary. Okay, and we wanted to separate the powers between the three organs because we know that we cannot control the government as individuals. Can we control the government? బయటికి వెళ్తే రోడ్డు మీద ఒక ఎస్ఎన్ కంట్రోల్ చేయడం, ఓకే, గవర్నమెంట్ ఏం కంట్రోల్ చేస్తాం? కాబట్టి ఏం చేయాలి? We divide the governmental functions into three organs: legislature, executive and judiciary, and we hope that every organ controls the other organs so that we can remain protected. Isn't it? The legislature will control the executive will control the legislature, both these organs will be controlled by judiciary. We discussed that, we discussed about the concept of checks and balances under the Indian constitution, in Indian polity, right? You remember? Okay, so in India we have established these three organs and we tried to establish a scheme of checks and balances whereby legislature controls the executive. How? Legislature ante central parliament, executive ante council of ministers. How does the legislature control the executive in India? Through questions.
No confidence.
By passing motions and resolutions. And even with the power of parliament to remove the government through a no confidence motion, our legislature can control the executive. How does the executive control the legislature? Any idea? How is our council of ministers able to control our parliament? With the power of the president to dissolve Lok Sabha on the advice of the Prime Minister. Okay? So the very life of Lok Sabha depends on the Council of Ministers. The very life of Council of Ministers depend on Lok Sabha. Checks and balances. How is our judiciary able to control our legislature? Through its power of judicial review. How is our judiciary able to control our executive? Judicial review. I told you, if you remember, judicial review applies to laws made by legislatures as well as every action of the executive. So through judicial review, our courts control our legislature and our executive. How does our executive control our judiciary? The power of executive appointment. The power of the executive to appoint the judges of Supreme Court and High Courts. Our executive controls our judiciary. How does our legislature control our judiciary? The power of legislature, parliament, to adopt motions of impeachment against our judges. Our legislature controls our judiciary. Scheme of checks and balances. We established a mechanism whereby each governmental organ checks or controls other governmental organs, and we thought individuals are safe. Okay, ఎందుకంటే మనం వీటిని కంట్రోల్ చేయలేం కాబట్టి వీళ్ళే కంట్రోల్ చేసుకోవాలి. ఒకరికి ఇంకొకరికి పెట్టామనుకోండి మనం సేఫ్గా ఉండొచ్చు అనుకున్నాం అనమాట. దట్స్ వాట్ వీ థాట్. This was called the theory of separation of powers, and the objective was to enforce a scheme of checks and balances so that individual liberty and freedom can be protected against abuse of power by the state. Now that was our hope. Okay, all these ideas about legislature, executive, judiciary, they're all an outcome of an ideology that we discussed yesterday, if you remember, called liberalism. Okay, now you know that the world had passed through several phases. We have three distinct phases of world history, just like we have in Indian history: ancient world, medieval world, and modern world. You remember, in the medieval times, there were a huge number of controls over man and his freedom. The medieval time was called as Christendom. The kind of political system that we had in the medieval period was described as Christendom. There were two forces that controlled man. Okay, two forces. One was religion, represented by Christ. We are speaking about the Western Europe. Okay, the European continent. That's where that was the theater of political thinking and thought. Okay, one was religion, and religion controlled man. Okay, the second one was kingdom, represented by monarch. He controlled man. Okay, and king established a feudal system to enhance his powers. Okay, and these two forces imposed a lot of control over man and his mind and his actions. Religion controlled thought, and king controlled actions. Every way, man's thoughts and actions were controlled. Man had no freedom, no liberty. And there used to be a host of feudal lords who exploited men. Okay, and men were made to believe that it was God who imposed these trials and tribulations. ఇవన్నీ చెప్పారన్నమాట, కథలు చెప్పారు అప్పట్లో. Okay, so man was made subservient to religion as well as to the monarch. They were absolute monarchies medieval time lo. Okay, then we suddenly had the birth of the modern era. And modern age was also called as the age of reason. It was called as the age of reason. Hetuvada yugam antarandi dinni. Okay, and there were two very important trends that characterized societies during the modern age. One was rationality, and second one was humanism. రేషనాలిటీ అండ్ హ్యూమనిజం. హేతువాదం, మానవతావాదం. ఈ రెండు దృక్పథాలు ఆధునిక సమాజాన్ని ప్రభావితం చేశాయి. ఓకే, సో ద మోడర్న్ సొసైటీ వాజ్ వెరీ స్ట్రాంగ్లీ ఇన్ఫ్లుయెన్స్డ్ బై దీస్ టూ వెరీ వెరీ స్ట్రాంగ్ ట్రెండ్స్, అండ్ దిస్ వాజ్ కాల్డ్ ద ఏజ్ ఆఫ్ ఎన్లైటన్మెంట్. హ్యావ్ యూ హర్డ్ దట్? ఏజ్ ఆఫ్ ఎన్లైటన్మెంట్. ఓకే, so from medieval age we suddenly came to the modern age. Right? And men now began to question religion. Okay? The act of reproduction or procreation was called by religion as a sin. మీకు తెలుసు కదా, క్రిస్టియానిటీ ప్రకారం Original sin antarandi. The act of procreation, giving birth to children, was described as an original sin by religion. In the modern time, that became an act of love. People began to change the way they thought. Previously, religion, I think I told you once in a class, it said that the earth was flat and across the Atlantic Ocean there is an edge. So if any ship tried to cross the Atlantic Ocean, it used to fall off that edge into a never-ending pit. Ani religion chepte nobody ever dared to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, Christopher Columbus was the person who said, no, there is land beyond those waters, and I'm going to prove that. He proved that, isn't it? He reached the West Indies, okay, and he thought, see, there is land beyond the Atlantic Ocean. Then voyages began, and suddenly somebody discovers America. Such a big continent across the Atlantic Ocean. Kabatti America was called as the New World. It was the most recently discovered land. Kada? New World అంటారు American. అప్పటిదాకా అంత పెద్ద ఖండం ఉందని కూడా తెలియదు. Why? Because religion said no. Right. Modern age. It was based on reason. Men began to question. Whatever good for us, we'll adopt. Whatever is bad for us, we'll reject as a dogma or a superstition. Science and scientific thinking, logic and positivism began to guide human thought. This was the modern man. This was the age of reason, and that led to enlightenment. Okay? It was during this time that a new ideology began to take shape, and that was called as liberalism. We discussed that recently. Liberalism began to take shape. Okay? This ideology, if you remember, we discussed yesterday, gave a lot of emphasis to individual liberty and freedom. Man became the center. Humanism అని చెప్పుకున్నాం కదా. Humanism అంటే ఏంటి? Man is at the center of all social, political and economic institutions. Whatever institutions that we have created, whether it is religion or government or king or the economic system, whatever the social, political and religious economic institutions that we have created, they're all supposed to cater to the well-being of man. దీన్ని హ్యూమనిజం అంటారండి. Man is at the center of everything. Okay? ఇంతకుముందు అది కాదు. Religion was the center of everything. Isn't it? Religion decided what we should do. Religion decided what was not good and what was sin. The 7 renal sins అంటారు చూసారా? Right. Gluttony, then deceitfulness, lust, ఇట్లాగా 7 sins. Religion decided what was good and what was not good for man. Man was not the architect of himself, isn't it? Modern man now became the center of all social, political and economic institutions. So we began to change. We began to adopt scientific attitude, scientific approach. We began to think positively, logically. We began to adopt reason, okay, instead of blind faith or belief. Okay? India was yet to come of the age. We are speaking about the Western countries at that time. Right? That led to what was very popularly called as Reformation. So liberal ideology helped man and societies reform themselves. So we began to reform our institutions, we began to reform our thinking, we began to reform our governments, okay? And that new ideology, that progressive, dynamic ideology in the modern times was called as liberalism. I told you yesterday, if you remember, liberalism supported a secular social order. Okay, society secularly undali. Man should have freedom to choose his faith. Man should have freedom to choose his relationship with God. Okay, there should not be any religious forceful indoctrination or imposition on man. Okay, man should be free to believe or to have his own faith. That's called as secular social order. Liberalism also supported a democratic political system. And liberalism supported capitalist mode of production. Capitalist mode of production. Okay? Right. And this was liberalism, my dear friends. Liberal ideology, which emphasized man, also proposed a distinct type of government. Okay? Government should be a minimum government. Okay? Government should be a minimum government. The government should primarily engage in regulatory functions. Okay? Regulatory functions. Okay, are you all okay with the story till here? Right? You please understand this as a story. Okay, because you'll require to have information about all these concepts and how things have evolved slowly. So, during this time, a minimum government was proposed. Liberalism, okay? A government which primarily focused on regulatory functions. Regulatory functions. Okay? Maintaining law and order. Okay? Ensuring compliance to laws. చట్టాల విధేయత ప్రజలు చూపించే విధంగా చర్యలు చేపట్టాలి. శాంతి భద్రతలు పరిరక్షించాలి. Ensuring compliance to laws, enforcement of law and order, protection from internal and external threats, enforcement of contracts, ఇట్లాంటి functions, regulatory functions. The state was supposed to perform only regulatory functions. ఎందుకంటే ఎక్కువ functions చేయకూడదు state. The state should not interfere in economic activities. I told you, if you remember, economic activities should be governed by the market principles of demand and supply. Okay? Perfect competition, profit motive, market forces, all these should be the principles for organizing economic activities and for taking economic decisions. This is what's called as the market principle. Okay? Competition, right? Profit motive, and interplay of market forces of demand and supply to determine all economic decisions and questions. This is what's called as market principle. The state should not interfere. The state should be a minimum state. The government should be a minimum government. Some people call this as the night watchman's view of government అంటారండి. అంటే ఏంటంటే నార్మల్గా అంత బాగుందనుకోండి, మనతో పాటు వాచ్మెన్ కూడా మంచిగా నిద్రపోతాడు కదా, isn't it? He'll not interfere with our sleep. సడన్గా ఏమైనా డిస్టర్బెన్స్ వచ్చిందనుకోండి, అప్పుడు నైట్ వాచ్మెన్ లేసి విజిలేసి గోల్ చేస్తుంది, isn't it? So when everything is okay, the state should not interfere. When somebody breaks the law, okay, or when something goes wrong, then only the state should interfere. Okay, that should be the role of the state, the minimum state. Okay, that was proposed by the liberal ideology. దీనికి అనుగుణంగానే we had a scheme of governance which was called as public administration. It's called as public administration. Okay. Public has a lot of meanings, in fact. Public can sometimes include something which belongs to everybody, like a public place. Okay. Or something which is open for everybody, like a public document. Court documents, they are called as public documents. Okay. They are open for everybody to see, to view. Or there is an officer who is performing duties as a public official, that is performing duties to ensure collective interests of the entire society without any private gain or profit. Okay? that is a public officer. So the term public has numerous meanings. Administration means to care for, or to manage, or to get things done. That is called as administration. Okay? So getting things done to ensure collective good is called as public administration. Okay? Right. Now that was different from something called as management. Management is what is usually done by private enterprises with profit motive. Administration is based on rules and regulations to ensure collective good by officials who are paid to do that work without any personal gain or personal interest. Okay? Then administration antaru. That's supposed to be different from management, which had profit motive, private interest. Okay? Here there is no private interest. There is only public interest by officials who are paid salaries to do that work. Public administration. So, based on the liberal idea, which proposes a minimum government, the nature of administration also was different. Okay? Laws enforce cheyali. Law and order maintain cheyali. Kabatti, administration was completely rule based. Administration was completely rule based. Administration was a closed system. It had a group of officials who were supposed to perform their duties. Okay? Administration was based on the concept of secrecy. Okay? So people don't have information about what's going on inside. We don't have information about what's going on inside. Isn't it? The government was based on secrecy. Even if you go and seek some information, they say, sorry sir, we cannot divulge this information. This is public information. And cheptaru kada. So government was based on the idea of secrecy, official secrecy. Right. రేపు పొద్దున కూడా మీరు రీసెంట్గా కౌన్సిల్ ఆఫ్ మినిస్టర్స్ స్వేరింగ్ ఇన్ సెరమనీ చూసారా? 2 ప్రమాణాలు చేస్తారు. తెలుసా మీకు? ఒకటే స్వేరింగ్ ఇన్లో 2 ప్రమాణాలు ఉంటాయి. ఒకటి oath of office. I take up the duties as so and so minister for the AP government or Telangana government. Oath of office. Second is oath of secrecy. Okay? So the entire government was based on the concept of secrecy. So people did not have any information because the mandate of the government was limited. Maintaining law and order, నీకు పబ్లిక్తో పని లేదు. ఎవరైనా చట్టాన్ని ఉల్లంఘిస్తే వాడిని పట్టుకురా అంతే. ఓకే? సో దట్ వాజ్ వెన్ గవర్నమెంట్స్ వేర్ పర్ఫార్మింగ్ లిమిటెడ్ ఫంక్షన్స్ అండ్ గవర్నమెంట్స్ వేర్ హ్యావింగ్ ఎ స్పెసిఫిక్ క్వాలిటీ అండ్ దే వేర్ కంప్లీట్లీ రూల్ బేస్డ్. దేర్ వాజ్ క్లియర్ కట్ hierarchy. Superior subordinate relationship was there. Okay? So this type of a government was proposed by the liberal ideology. ఎందుకంటే గవర్నమెంట్కి ఎక్కువ పని ఏం లేదు కదా, ప్రజలతో ఎక్కువ ఇంటర్ఫేస్ కూడా లేదు, ప్రజలకి మ్యాక్సిమం ఫ్రీడమ్ ఇవ్వాలి, ప్రజలకి దూరంగానే ఉండాలి ప్రభుత్వం. ఓకే? దట్ వాస్ హౌ పీపుల్ వ్యూడ్ ద గవర్నమెంట్. కాబట్టే ద పబ్లిక్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ హ్యాడ్ ఇట్స్ ఓన్ డిస్టింక్ట్ క్వాలిటీ. Okay, this was during the time of liberalism. Slowly, by the beginning of 19th century, appadaka capitalism proved to be a boon. From medieval times, if you remember, I told you medieval times man was subjected to all kinds of controls, restrictions, religion on one side, feudal system on the other side, monarch on the other side. Man had absolutely no freedoms, and that's the reason why there was no art, no architecture, no development, no science, no technology, no drama, no philosophy, no literature, nothing. The entire medieval period was cleft in darkness, and that's the reason why the medieval period was also called as the Dark Age, isn't it? Suddenly, man grew out of this darkness and entered the phase of enlightenment in the modern times. Okay? And in the modern time, I told you liberalism proposed that man should be free. See, we don't require governments to take care of individuals. That's a violation of individual dignity. Give him freedom. Allow him to take care of himself. Allow individuals to pursue his self-interest. Let him not be controlled by the government. What we need as individuals is freedom. అంతే. మేమేంటి, మా అవసరాలేంటి, మా ప్రయోజనాలేంటి, మా ఆసక్తులేంటి, మా కళలేంటి, మా ఆశయాలేంటి మేము నిర్ధారించుకుంటాం. వాటి కోసం మేము కృషి చేస్తాం. వీ డోంట్ రిక్వైర్ గవర్నమెంట్స్. ఓకే, గవర్నమెంట్ షుడ్ ఓన్లీ ప్లే ఏ మినిమం రోల్. మెయింటైన్ లా అండ్ ఆర్డర్ మాకు చాలు. ఓకే, లిబరలిజం. దానికి అనుగుణంగానే అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ వాస్ designed. It was rule based, it was having very, very clearly established hierarchy, it was based on the concept of secrecy, it was a closed system. Slowly, as I told you, by the beginning of 18th century, capitalism, which had given unprecedented growth to humanity, suddenly began to show its ugly side, its darker side. Capitalism began to lead to inequalities, capitalism began to lead to unbridled competition and adoption of unethical means by corporates. Capitalism began to show exploitation of the vulnerable sections. And capitalism led to, expansion, colonization, territorial aggrandizement and wars. This was what we had seen. Okay? The ugly side of capitalism began to come to the forefront. First, capitalism was challenged by yet another ideology. I told you in the class, if you remember, what was that? Socialism. Capitalism was challenged by socialism. Okay? Karl Marx was very clear in his idea. He starts with the fundamentals. Karl Marx says that in capitalism, production is organized for the sake of profits. So profit motive is the driving force for production of goods and services. Profit motive. Not necessarily social need. Isn't it? Kabatti, what can happen in capitalism is that the production of goods and services can be hijacked for the purposes of profits rather than for meeting social requirements. Capitalism, therefore, is an irrational mode of production. Capitalism is an irrational mode of production. అని క్రిటిసైజ్ చేస్తారు కార్ల్ మార్క్స్. కాబట్టి కార్ల్ మార్క్స్ ఏమంటాడంటే ద ఫాల్ ఆఫ్ క్యాపిటలిజం ఈజ్ ఇన్ఎవిటబుల్ అంటాడు. ఇవాళ కాకపోతే రేపు, రేపు కాకపోతే ఎల్లుండు, ఎప్పుడో ఒకసారి ద ఫాల్ ఆఫ్ క్యాపిటలిజం ఈజ్ ఇన్ఎవిటబుల్. Capitalism will come crumbling down on the weight of its own contradictions. Capitalism లో చాలా కాంట్రడిక్షన్స్ ఉన్నాయి. ఆ కాంట్రడిక్షన్సే క్యాపిటలిజం వినాశనానికి దారితీస్తాయి. ఓకే, క్యాపిటలిజం ఈజ్ అన్ ఐడియాలజీ బోర్న్ ప్రెగ్నెంట్ విత్ ద సీడ్స్ ఆఫ్ ఇట్స్ ఓన్ డిస్ట్రక్షన్. తన వినాశనానికి తానే బీజాలు వేసుకుని పుట్టిన భావజాలం క్యాపిటలిజం అని చెప్పి అంటాడు కార్ల్ మార్క్స్. సో హీ బిలీవ్డ్ దట్ ఫాల్ ఆఫ్ క్యాపిటలిజం వాజ్ ఇన్ఎవిటబుల్. ఓకే, అండ్ దిస్ వాజ్ ద సోషలిస్ట్ ఐడియాలజీ. And socialist ideology became very, very popular in the initial years of the 19th century. 20th century. Okay? It was slowly gaining a lot of popularity. Even a lot of Indian leaders also came under the influence of socialism. Meeku telusu kada? Anybody with whom you know? Jawaharlal Nehru was a socialist, sir. M.N. Roy. Ambedkar also, to a small, perhaps brief period, but then he realized socialism is not correct for India. Then we had Subhash Chandra Bose. He formed what was called as the forward bloc. Then we had Chandrasekhar Azad. Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh also was very strongly influenced by socialism. You know, Bhagat Singh was considered to be very dangerous by British. You know why? Because Bhagat Singh, కొన్ని కాంబినేషన్స్ డేంజరస్ ఉంటాయండి. ఓకే, ఆడపిల్లలకి ఇంటెలిజెన్స్ అండ్ బ్యూటీ ఇస్ డేంజరస్ కాంబినేషన్ అంట. మగపిల్లలకి కరేజ్ అండ్ ఇంటెలిజెన్స్ ఆర్ కన్సిడర్డ్ టు బి వెరీ, వెరీ డేంజరస్ కాంబినేషన్. అండ్ భగత్ సింగ్ వాజ్ దాట్ fatal combination. He was very courageous and he was very, very smart and intelligent. Bhagat Singh renamed Hindustan Republican Army as Hindustan Socialist Republican Army. He was also very strongly influenced by socialist ideology. Okay? He was a voracious reader anta, Bhagat Singh. Okay? So socialism began to become very, very popular. It began to capture the imagination of intelligentsia and academic circles. The universities in Europe at that time were infested with communists and socialists. Appatlo. Okay? At the same time, capitalism also began to show its weaknesses. And the first socialist country, USSR, began to show great developmental trends. It adopted planning and it began to show developmental advancement at a much faster pace than capitalist countries. Okay? Thirdly, you know that the world witnessed the Great Economic Depression in 1929. Okay? I told you, if you remember, the Great Economic Depression was characterized by something called as poverty amidst plenty. The market was flooded with all goods. With all goods. And people were not able to purchase because they lacked purchasing power. There was no demand. Demand ledu. Kabatti evaru konukkotledu. Kabatti industries em chestayi? They stopped supply. And therefore it led to unemployment. And people's purchasing power further fell. And absolutely there was no demand and market became stagnant, filled with goods, with no offtake, no demand, and industries bringing their production to a halt. That was the Great Economic Depression. Now these trends of capitalism also began to put serious questions on whether capitalism was the best way to organize production and distribution or not. Okay? So people began to question capitalism in a very big way. It was at this time that a new school of economics began to take shape. Okay? And that was led by the person who gave a solution to the Great Economic Depression, J.M. Keynes. Who proposed that the state should engage in macroeconomic management. Okay? To overcome the ill effects of capitalism, the state should engage in macroeconomic management. Now that was the proposal put forward by J.M. Keynes. You know, he gave a solution to the Great Economic Depression. You know what it was? Simple. ఏం చెప్పాడు కీన్స్? నో ఐడియా. అదే డిగ్ హోల్స్, క్లోజ్ హోల్స్. దాంతో ఎకనమీ ఎట్లా డెవలప్ అవుతుంది సార్? ఓకే. మేక్ పీపుల్ డిగ్ హోల్స్, గివ్ దెమ్ మనీ. మేక్ పీపుల్ ఫిల్ ద హోల్స్, గివ్ దెమ్ మనీ. ఇంక్రీజ్ పర్చేసింగ్ పవర్ ఆఫ్ ద పీపుల్. హౌ? By massive public spending. Government should spend a lot of money, increase purchasing power, enhance demand. Simple solutions. State should start interfering in economy. You know, that was called macroeconomic management. So new school of economics called Keynesian economics began to take shape, which proposed a greater role of government in organizing economic activities. Okay. So evils of capitalism, inequalities, a lot of downtrodden, underprivileged, disadvantaged section of society, not having any fruits in development, trade cycles and the Great Economic Depressions, propelling economists to propose new school of economics called Keynesian economics. All these ultimately led to the birth of a new concept called welfare state. Okay? Right? The popularity of socialism, Keynesian economics, and need to overcome the evils of unbridled and uncontrolled capitalism. Okay? All this led to the birth of a new idea called welfare state. So the concept of welfare state or the idea of welfare state became very popular in the interwar period between the First and the Second World Wars. So between the first and the second world wars, the concept of welfare state became very popular, which proposed that state should assume the role of macroeconomic management and also promoting welfare of people. So government, which was initially supposed to perform the duty of maintaining law and order and ensuring protection, which are called as regulatory functions, now slowly required to adopt welfare orientation. Okay, so the nature of government began to change. Okay, so in the interwar period, the government now assumed welfare responsibilities or duties, began to create elaborate welfare mechanism, right? And here, the nature of public administration also began to change. So previously, public administration was more about a rule-based, closed system, secrecy and hierarchy, and public administration was mechanical. It was like a machine. ప్రభుత్వం యంత్రాంగంలో పనిచేస్తుందండి, కాబట్టి దాన్ని ప్రభుత్వ యంత్రాంగం అంటారు, మీకు తెలుసు కదా, రైట్? ఇట్ వర్క్స్ లైక్ ఏ మెషిన్. ఓకే, వితౌట్ ఎనీ స్కోప్ ఫర్ ఆబ్జెక్టివ్ సబ్జెక్టివ్ ఫీలింగ్స్ అవేం లేకుండా ఒక యంత్రంలాగా పనిచేయాలి. ఓకే, పేవ్మెంట్స్ పైన ఇళ్ళున్నాయి, మీరు రేపు పొద్దున గ్రూప్ వన్ ఆఫీసర్ అయ్యారు. యువర్ రెస్పాన్సిబిలిటీ ఇస్ టు రిమూవ్ దీస్ ఇల్లీగల్ encroachments on the pavement. You go there, you see those very poor people with small babies, somehow huddled in small huts, steeped in impoverishment. Okay, you're an officer, supposed to clear those huts. Meenlo unna humanity చచ్చిపోవాలి. ఓకే, ఒక యంత్రం లాగా మీరు ఆ హట్స్ని క్లీన్ చేయాలి. the administration should work like a machine. దానికోసం ఎట్లా చేయాలి, ఏం చేయాలి అని చెప్పి రకరకాల ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ని ప్రపోజ్ చేశారండి. పబ్లిక్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ వీ కెన్ ప్రపోజ్ ఆల్ డిఫరెంట్ టైప్స్ ఆఫ్ ప్రిన్సిపల్స్ సో దట్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ వర్క్స్ లైక్ ఏ మెషిన్ without allowing any human factor. But now, state began to assume the role of a welfare state. Okay? So government welfare activities చేపడుతుంది కదా, therefore the role of public administration also should change. The nature of public administration also should change. Therefore, by 1920s, we saw a new trend in public administration which was called as new public administration, which proposed administration with a human face. Administration which is responsive to social realities. Administration which understood vulnerabilities. డెవలప్మెంట్ చేయాలి అంటే డెవలప్మెంట్తో పాటు ఆ ప్రాజెక్ట్ ఎఫెక్టెడ్ పీపుల్ వెల్ఫేర్ని కూడా గవర్నమెంట్ చూసుకోవాలి. ఈ ఓరియంటేషన్ గవర్నమెంట్కి రావడం మొదలుపెట్టింది. దట్ వాస్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ న్యూ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్. అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ విత్ ఏ హ్యూమన్ ఫేస్. Okay, which also proposed principles like equity. ఇంతకుముందు అంతా ఈక్విటీ లేదు కదా ప్రిన్సిపల్స్. Okay, it proposed principles like equity and administration with a human face and taking social realities into existence. Okay, administration becoming flexible to needs, right? ఇది new administration. It became very popular by 1920s, right? Slowly. So this was the idea of welfare state, and the concept of welfare state became very popular. It was popular for a very, very long time, right? In the meanwhile, the Second World War had come to an end, and a score of newly independent countries emerged, which are called as the Third World countries. Okay, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. Okay, what were the First World countries? First World countries ante evaru? Second world ante? Okay. First world countries were industrially advanced capitalist countries. వాటిని ఫస్ట్ వరల్డ్ కంట్రీస్ అంటారండి. సెకండ్ వరల్డ్ కంట్రీస్ అంటే ఇండస్ట్రియల్లీ అడ్వాన్స్డ్ సోషలిస్ట్ కంట్రీస్. దే వర్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ ద సెకండ్ వరల్డ్ కంట్రీస్. రీసెంట్లీ ఇండిపెండెంట్ developing countries were labeled as third world countries. Okay, so we have seen the emergence of a score of third world countries, right, after the Second World War. And these third world countries had their own requirement. The third world countries required to modernize their economy. They required to develop infrastructure. They required to develop the human capabilities. They required to create conditions for optimum utilization of resources. A good number of these third world countries who suffered colonization inherited truncated and lopsided economies. For example, India kuda, by the time we became independent, we had inherited a very, very backward and a truncated economy. Okay, cotton industries emo India lo, cotton producing areas emo Pakistan lo. Okay, excuse me, cotton producing areas India lo, cotton industries emo Pakistan lo. Okay, jute producing areas emo Pakistan lo, jute industries emo India lo. Okay, a lopsided economy, a truncated economy. We had inherited a truncated economy, right? Not only India, a score of all these third world countries, they are required to modernize, they are required to develop. Therefore, administration required to develop a new orientation in these third world countries, and that was called as development administration. Okay, so public administration, which later on became new public administration, now also began to adopt development orientation, and it began to be called as development administration. New public administration nunchi malli development administration. Particularly with respect to the third world countries, this new idea began to take shape. It was called as development administration. Are you all with me, my dear friends? This is just like a story. Understand this like a story, okay? Right? So, now, government, which initially was limited to regulatory functions and responsibilities, and later slowly adopted welfare measures, was now also to acquire a development perspective. Okay? So government now also required to adopt a development perspective. Right? And that was called as development administration. So మెల్లిగా పబ్లిక్ అడ్మినిస్ట్రేషన్ స్వరూపం కూడా మారుతుంది. మారుతున్న ప్రజల ఆశయాలకి అనుగుణంగా పరిపాలన వ్యవస్థలో కూడా మార్పులు వస్తూ ఉంటాయి. అంతే కదండి, we are not static, right? We evolve, we change, and based on our change, even governments also evolve. Right? So that was how slowly the concept of development administration became very popular in 1950s, particularly in the third world countries. Okay? Now, things were going on. Okay? So throughout the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, the concept of welfare state became very popular. Okay? And a good number of countries, not only in the third world developing countries, but also in the developing countries, began to adopt welfare mechanism, and government started to give birth to or create elaborate welfare structures and mechanisms. A series of welfare legislations were being made. Okay, a series of programs were being implemented even by the Western countries. For example, in 1940s, the New Deal program was initiated by President Roosevelt in America. New Deal program. Okay, that was a welfare measure in America, which was the bastion, the fortress of capitalism. So capitalism ki fortress lante America lo kuda welfare measures began to be adopted by the government. So welfare measures, welfare mechanism ni create chesaru, welfare laws were being made. Okay, so all the states began to adopt welfare measures. In one form or another, Keynesian economics also contributed to this, right? State began to interfere in economic activities. State began to slowly adopt planning. Chinna vidhanga. For example, India lo adopt cheskundi physical planning, Western countries lo adopt cheskundi financial planning. Okay, though the nature of planning was different, state began to slowly interfere in economic activities. Okay, right? So till here everything is okay, right? Liberalism. Okay, it created an administrative system which was closed, which was based on the concept of secrecy, which was based on formalism and rule bound and which was based on clear-cut hierarchy. Okay? Slowly, the concept of welfare state became very popular, and therefore, the administrative system also underwent a change. It began to adopt more flexible approach. It began to adopt a human face. It began to be responsive to social needs. Okay? So, rules also were considered to be for meeting social needs. Previously, the administration was the prisoner of procedures and rules rather than achiever of objectives. Atla undedi paripalana. Melliga danlo flexibility తీసుకొచ్చారు. That was called as new public administration and slowly development administration. This continued. The concept of welfare state, as I told you, was very popular both in the developing countries as well as in the developed countries, and therefore throughout the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s and even 80s also, the administrative system was modeled after this idea called welfare state. Okay? However, by the middle of 1980s, slowly some changes began to take place. Okay? Threat from communism began to come down. Soviet Union collapsed. Soviet Union disintegrate అయిపోయింది కదండి. ఎప్పుడు? 1989. Soviet Union disintegrated. Okay? And we are seeing a new international economic order that was evolving slowly. Okay? So as socialism began to become weak, the Western countries began to express their dissatisfaction with the concept of welfare state. Why should the state do so many things? The concept of welfare state became very well entrenched and state began to assume lot of functions. We had expanded public sector. And state began to enter into every sphere of economic activities. Actually, if you remember, from producing consumer goods also, watchlu, TVlu, radiolu, okay, ఇవన్నీ గవర్నమెంట్ ప్రొడ్యూస్ చేస్తుందన్నమాట. ఓకే, నాకు తెలిసి there used to be one company called HMT, which used to produce so many things in India, చాలా goods, consumer goods. అదే ఆల్విన్, HMT, ఇట్లా కొన్ని కంపెనీస్ ఉండేవి, పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజెస్. దే యూస్ టు ప్రొడ్యూస్ ఈవెన్ కన్స్యూమర్ గుడ్స్ ఆల్సో. ఇప్పుడు చైనాలో ఒక చిన్న ఇంట్లో ఒక ట్రాన్సిస్టర్ని వాళ్ళు తయారు చేసేస్తారండి, లోకల్గా దొరికే చిన్న చిన్న ఆర్టికల్స్ తోటి. ఓకే, అంటే ఒక ఇంట్లో ఒక స్మాల్ స్కేల్ ఇండస్ట్రీ చేసే పని కూడా గవర్నమెంట్ ఒక పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజ్ పెట్టి చేయాలా, అట్లాంటి పరిస్థితి అనమాట. సో పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ బికెమ్ వెరీ ఎక్స్పాన్సివ్, గవర్నమెంట్స్ machinery became very elaborate, and government began to wield a huge amount of power in economy. Economic system was riddled with all kinds of controls, regulations, licenses, and government began to hold all the resources under its command, began to plan its activities, and state became very elaborate. Therefore, there was a very strong dissatisfaction with the growing expanse of the state, growing volume of the state. Obviously, the government cannot do everything efficiently, isn't it? మీకు తెలుసు కదా, పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజెస్ were sometimes described as white elephants. Must have heard about that. Okay, ఎందుకు? గవర్నమెంట్ వాజ్ డూయింగ్ ఎవ్రీథింగ్. ఒక 10 మంది కావాల్సిన ఒక ఎంటర్ప్రైజ్లో 100 మందిని గవర్నమెంట్ ఎంప్లాయ్ చేస్తున్నది. ఎందుకు? బికాస్ గవర్నమెంట్ వాంటెడ్ టు ఇంక్రీజ్ ఎంప్లాయ్మెంట్. ఒక పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజ్ అంటే ఒక కంపెనీ, అది ఇట్ షుడ్ ప్రొడ్యూస్ గూడ్స్ ఎఫిషియెంట్లీ, ఇట్ షుడ్ మేక్ యూజ్ ఆఫ్ రిసోర్సెస్ ఆప్టిమల్లీ కదా. కానీ దానికి 10 మంది కావాల్సిన 100 మందిని పెట్టేసి గవర్నమెంట్ ఇస్ ట్రైంగ్ టు ఎన్హాన్స్ ఎంప్లాయ్మెంట్ అంటే ద ప్రాఫిటబిలిటీ ఆఫ్ ద కంపెనీ విల్ కమ్ డౌన్, ఇట్ విల్ బికమ్ ఇన్ఎఫిషియంట్. సో గవర్నమెంట్స్ బికేమ్ వెరీ ఇన్ఎఫిషియంట్, అండ్ పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజెస్ వేర్, లెట్స్ సే, riddled with all kinds of diseconomies and inefficiency, locational disadvantages. ఒక ప్రాంతాన్ని డెవలప్ చేయాలనుకోండి, ఓకే, గవర్నమెంట్ ఏం చేసేది? కూడా పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజ్ పెట్టేది ఒక ప్రాంతాన్ని డెవలప్ చేయడానికి. ఎందుకంటే అక్కడికి 10 మంది ఉద్యోగం కోసం వస్తారు, ఒక హోటల్ వస్తుంది, వచ్చిన స్కూల్ వస్తుంది, దానికి రోడ్డు పడుతుంది, డెవలప్ అయిపోతుంది. ఇది ఐడియా. కానీ ఆ పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజ్కి ఆ లొకేషనల్ డిసడ్వాంటేజ్ అయినా ఉందా అని చెప్పి గవర్నమెంట్ చూడలేదన్నమాట. రా మెటీరియల్స్ కోసం ఎక్కడికో వెళ్ళాల్సి వచ్చేది. ఓకే, ట్రాన్స్పోర్ట్ లింకేజెస్ ఉండేవి కాదు, సప్లై చైన్స్ ఉండేవి కాదు. దేర్ఫోర్ పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజ్ బికేమ్ ఇన్ఎఫిషియంట్. ఇట్లా మల్టిపుల్ ఫ్యాక్టర్స్ తోటి ఎప్పుడైతే గవర్నమెంట్ రకరకాల విధాలుగా ఈ పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజెస్ని ఎస్టాబ్లిష్ చేయడం స్టార్ట్ చేసిందో, దీస్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజెస్ బికాన్ టు షో లాట్ ఆఫ్ ఇన్ఎఫిషియన్సీ. It led to high cost economy. Therefore, there was a huge amount of dissatisfaction with growing state presence in the economy by 1980s. It was at this time that a new ideology had taken birth, and that was called as Neoliberalism. Okay? Okay? Which proposed that the nature of administration should change. Okay, it proposed that the nature of administration should change. It proposed that administration should be more efficient. Okay, public administration also should be like what we see in private sector. Private sector is driven by profits. Private sector is based on outcomes, isn't it? ఇప్పుడు ఒక ప్రాంతంలో ఎడ్యుకేషన్ డెవలప్ చేయాలనుకుంది గవర్నమెంట్. వాట్ గవర్నమెంట్ ఈజ్ డూయింగ్ ఈజ్, ఈ ప్రాంతం ఎడ్యుకేషన్ డెవలప్ చేయడానికి ఒక 200 crores అలాట్ చేసేస్తుంది. ఓకే, దాంతో తన పని అయిపోయింది అని చెప్పి గవర్నమెంట్ అనుకుంటుంది. ఓకే, అదే ప్రైవేట్ సెక్టర్ అనుకోండి, ఒక 200 crores పెడితే దానికి ఎంత రిటర్న్ వస్తుంది అని చెప్పి చూస్తుంది కదా. గవర్నమెంట్స్ కూడా అట్లా పనిచేయాలి. ద గవర్నమెంట్ షుడ్ బి అవుట్కమ్ బేస్డ్. Government should function like private organizations. Therefore, government should aim at not administration but management. And that was called as the new public management. So people began to profess the idea that government should try to work like private organizations, okay, and should be outcome based. It should become efficient, it should become responsive. Okay, it should work like private organizations, and that was called as new public management. Okay, so from public administration we have seen new public administration, and slowly from new public administration we had seen another perspective called development administration. And in recent times, because of neoliberalism, we had seen a change in the way people began to view the functioning of government. They proposed what was called as new public management. So government should function like a private organization. Government should aim at outcomes, not just at inputs. Outputs, what's the output? Okay, so government should try and reduce its wasteful expenditures. Government should give up on subsidies. Government should stop welfare activities. Enduku welfare activities? What's logic in welfare activities? You are robbing the rich to gift a lazy, insolent, inefficient and incapable man. This is injustice. Okay, Margaret Thatcher, the weak, let them go to the wall. The state has no business to protect them. You know, have you heard about Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of England? She was called as the Iron Lady of England. Okay, she said, let the weak go to the wall. The state has no business to protect them. They should learn to protect themselves. Government is not here to, safeguard people from cradle to grave. It is their duty. You are born a human being. You are capable. You have abilities. Give expression to your abilities and take care of yourself. It is not the duty of state to take care of you. Okay? I asked you once in the class, do you like government taking care of you? No, you don't like it. After you are well aware of your capabilities, you want to give expression to your abilities to take care of yourself. That's what you want to do. Isn't it? We feel indignant to be protected and taken care of by the state. We don't want pensions. We want creation of an enabling environment which helps us realize our capabilities. Give us education, give us health, చాలు. అన్నీ మేమే ఇస్తాం. గోరుముద్దలు పెడతామంటే అక్కర్లేదు అంటాం కదా. జగనన్న గోరుముద్దలు, అమ్మఒడి, తోడు నీడ, ఆసరా, ఏంటి అసలు ఇవన్నీ? వాట్ ఈస్ దిస్? డూ వి రిక్వైర్ దిస్? 40 yearsకి పెన్షన్స్, ఓకే, నిరుద్యోగ భృతి, ఓకే. దిస్ ఈజ్ నాట్ వాట్ పీపుల్ వాంట్ ఫ్రమ్ ద గవర్నమెంట్. సో this is what was called as Neoliberalism, okay. So slowly there were a good number of political leaders who preached the idea of rollback of the state. Let the state be rolled back. కార్పెట్ ని చుట్టేసినట్టుగా స్టేట్ ని కూడా రోల్ బ్యాక్ చేసేయాలి, ఒక మూలన కూర్చోబెట్టాలి, దాని పని ఎంతవరకు ఉందో అంతవరకే చేయాలి. యూనో, ఇట్ వాజ్ ప్రెసిడెంట్ రొనాల్డ్ రీగన్ ఆఫ్ US who proposed roll back of the state. స్టేట్ అంటే గవర్నమెంట్ ఉంది, okay. It was Margaret Thatcher who proposed. Have you heard this? Tina, have you heard that? There is no alternative to neoliberalism. No alternative. There is no alternative to globalization. The world is going to be integrated economically, you know. So neoliberalism became the most dominant idea. This trend started in middle of 1980s, okay, neoliberalism. And it preached that the government should work like a private enterprise. It should be based on outcomes. It should become efficient. It should become responsive. It should aim at extracting proper developmental gains through all public investments. అంతేగాని ఏదో పెడుతున్నాము కంపెనీస్లో, పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ ఎంటర్ప్రైజెస్లో, వాటి ద్వారా ఉద్యోగాలు ఇస్తున్నాము అంటే సరిపోదు, అవుట్కమ్స్ కావాలి. యూనో, దట్ వాస్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ ద న్యూ పబ్లిక్ మేనేజ్మెంట్, ఓకే. దట్ వాస్ ద ట్రెండ్. Coupled with this, coupled with neoliberalism, there was another very strong factor that affected the nature of administration, and that was the information and communication technology, right? So people started to come under the influence of information communication technology, you know. I keep telling this example, this small experience that I had. You know, when my daughter was studying in her intermediate, there used to be some small problems in her college, okay. I still remember this very clearly, as if it happened yesterday, you know, right? There were small incidents and that were happening in the colleges. There were small problems, okay. Classes were not being properly organized by the management and so forth. So one of the students in the college class, in her class, what she did was, from all her friends, she collected the numbers of their parents and she created a WhatsApp group, okay. And on one day she posted all the problems of the college in that group. Slowly in that group discussion began to take place, okay. And all the parents through that WhatsApp group decided to meet on one Sunday, okay. Somebody knew some person in the press, they called them. Somebody knew some police fellow, they called them, okay. And they all organized themselves on one Sunday morning. They discussed the problems, took up the issue with the management, forced it to resolve the problems, you know. This is the new influence that information and communication technology had on our lives. People are now being organized, okay. These two trends have strongly influenced what is called as civil society. Have you heard that? Civil society. Have you heard this term before? Civil society. Vinnara? One of the most determining feature of the present world is strong presence of civil society. Okay. Today, if we have to resist the government, if we have to oppose the government, if we have to fight against the government, we are not doing it as individuals. We are organizing. Okay. ఈ సోషల్ మీడియా నెట్వర్క్స్లో పొద్దున్న లెగ్గానే ఫస్ట్ ఒక 10 minutes అదే కదా మనం చూసేది. నేనైతే అదే చూస్తానులేండి. ఓకే, వైఫ్ కాఫీ ఇచ్చేంత వరకు అక్కడే ఉంటాం, సోషల్ మీడియాలోనే ఉంటాం అనమాట. ఓకే, పొద్దున ఈవెన్ వాళ్ళు కూడా అంతే, లెగ్గానే ఫస్ట్ ఒక 15 minutes ఇంటర్నెట్ షాపింగ్లో ఉంటారనమాట, నెట్ షాపింగ్లో ఉంటారనమాట. ఆ తర్వాతే కాఫీ కలపడం ఒకటి ఇవన్నీ. ఓకే, సో ఎవరి పనుల్లో వాళ్ళు ఉన్నారండి, సోషల్ మీడియాలోనే అందరూ. ఓకే, వర్చువల్ వరల్డ్లోనే ఉన్నారు అందరూ. ఓకే, సో because of this information communication technology, we have seen the civil society being revitalized. Today people are organizing, people are forming groups, people are forming associations, environmental issues అనుకోండి, people are forming groups. Okay, ఏదో ఒక ప్రాంతంలో atmosphere is being polluted because of a company. Okay, the people are forming into a group, they are giving a representation to the government, they are organizing agitations. Okay, civil society became the terrain on which the present battles are being fought. This is the terrain on which the peoples are fighting political battles, civil society. And this civil society comprises the groups, associations, organizations and unions of individuals outside the state. రాజ్యానికి బహిర్గతంగా ప్రజలు స్థాపించుకున్నటువంటి యూనియన్లు, అసోసియేషన్లు, ఆర్గనైజేషన్లు అన్నీ కలిపి, దట్ ఈజ్ అవర్ సివిల్ సొసైటీ. దిస్ ఈజ్ ఆల్సో కాల్డ్ యాజ్ ద సోషల్ సెక్టర్. Okay, it comprises of all the groups of individuals in the form of associations kani, unions kani, right? We have the non-governmental organizations. Okay, then we have voluntary associations. Okay, then we have self-help groups. We have the interest groups and pressure groups. ఓకే, మీ స్టూడెంట్స్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్ ఉన్నాయి కదా, రైట్? స్టూడెంట్స్ ఫెడరేషన్ ఆఫ్ ఇండియా, ఇండియన్ నేషనల్ ట్రేడ్ యూనియన్ కాంగ్రెస్, ఎక్స్క్యూజ్ మీ, ఏంటది, ఇండియన్ NICU, NSUI, నేషనల్ స్టూడెంట్స్ యూనియన్ ఆఫ్ ఇండియా, అఖిల భారతీయ విద్యార్థి పరిషత్, రాడికల్ స్టూడెంట్స్ యూనియన్. ఓకే, స్టూడెంట్స్ ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్. We have the trade unions. For example, Indian National Trade Union Congress, INTUC, AITUC, All India Trade Union Congress, Central Trade Union Congress, Hind Mazdoor Sangh, ఇవన్నీ కూడా ప్రెషర్ గ్రూప్స్. ఓకే, we also have women's organizations, right? Can you tell me which is the largest women's organization in this country? All India Democratic Women's Association, ఐదువా అంటారు చూసారా? ఓకే, that's the largest women's organization. We have organizations which are aiming at political reforms, like, Association for Democratic Reforms. Have you heard that? ADR. Recently కోర్టులో కేసులన్నీ వేస్తుంటే చూసారా, అదే అన్ని విషయాలు కోర్టులో పిల్స్ అవి వేస్తుంటుందండి, అసోసియేషన్ ఫర్ డెమోక్రటిక్ రిఫార్మ్స్ అని. ఓకే, ఇట్లా రకరకాల ఆర్గనైజేషన్స్. దెన్ వీ హ్యావ్ the రైతు కూలీ సంఘాస్, the farmers associations. Can you tell me which is the biggest farmers association in this country, which recently spearheaded the movement against agrarian laws? సెంట్రల్ గవర్నమెంట్ రీసెంట్గా కొన్ని అగ్రికల్చర్ లాస్ తీసుకొచ్చింది కదండి, దానికి వ్యతిరేకంగా పెద్ద గొడవ అయింది కదా ఇండియాలో. దాన్ని స్పియర్ హెడ్ చేసినటువంటి ఫార్మర్స్ అసోసియేషన్ పేరు BKU, భారతీయ కిసాన్ యూనియన్, రైట్? ఇట్లాంటివన్నీ కూడా దే ఆర్ పార్ట్ ఆఫ్ సివిల్ సొసైటీ. టుడే సివిల్ సొసైటీ ఈజ్ ద బ్యాటిల్ గ్రౌండ్ through which we are fighting or waging wars against the state. This is the new battleground, civil society. Okay, so we have a very powerfully emerging civil society in India. Not only in India, in almost all the countries. Right? Intakmundu inta powerful ga undedi kadandi civil society. Okay, so people used to make appeals to the government through their representatives or through political parties. Eppudu civil society has emerged very, very powerful. Okay, right? So today civil society has emerged, and we also have a very strongly emerging private sector, and we have the government. Okay, therefore this new scenario also required a change in the nature of administration. And that's the reason why today, in place of public administration, we call this as governance. Okay? Governance. So, intak mundu, government was closed. Government was based on rigid hierarchies. Government was rule bound. And government was impersonal. Right? It was like a machine. Through elaborate processes and procedures. But now, because of the emergence of strong civil society and also because of the new role assumed by private sector, okay, the nature of government also has slowly changed. So from public administration, we are slowly moving towards what is called as governance. Okay, governance. Governance is a process. Which is a participatory process in which the government, in partnership with the private sector and social sector, takes all decisions. It takes all decisions. Policies are formulated, laws are made in partnership with these other important stakeholders. Okay? Government ante legislature, executive and judiciary. Okay? Private sector ante all the corporate entities which are based on profits, which work through profit motive. Okay? Right? And social sector includes the major agencies of the civil society. The major agencies of the civil society, which are having service motive. Okay? So governance is a process of partnership of the government with the private sector as well as civil society organizations for formulation of policies, taking decisions and enactment of laws. This participatory process is called as governance. Are you with me, my dear friends? Okay? This is the meaning of governance and how it had evolved, starting from where it was as public administration and slowly it evolved as new public administration, development administration, new public management, and finally we have arrived at what was called as the process of governance. Okay? Please understand this evolution, my dear friends. Okay? So, governance therefore is a participatory mechanism. It is a participatory mechanism. Okay? It proposes that administration should be open. It should be open to allow the partnership of the private sector as well as the civil society. It should not be closed. Okay? It should not be a closed system which is operating in secrecy. It should be an open system. Okay? It should be transparent. The power should not be centralized. The power should be decentralized. Okay? The government processes should operate in such a way that they create an enabling atmosphere for the interface between the government, private sector and the social sector. And this is what's called as governance. Are you all with me? Any doubts, my dear friends? Yes? ఇది గవర్నమెంట్, ఇది ప్రైవేట్ సెక్టర్, ఇది సోషల్ సెక్టర్. ఈ మధ్యలో జరిగే ప్రక్రియ ఉంది చూసారా? ఓకే, ఇందులో మనకి లెజిస్లేచర్, ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్, జ్యుడిషియరీ అందరూ ఉంటారు. ఇందులోనేమో ప్రైవేట్ సెక్టర్ కాబట్టి కార్పొరేట్ బాడీస్ అన్నీ ఉంటాయి. ఇందులో అన్ని సివిల్ సొసైటీ ఏజెన్సీస్ ఉంటాయి. ఈ ముగ్గురు కలిసి భాగస్వామ్యంతో చేసే పనిని గవర్నెన్స్ అని చెప్పి అంటారు. ఓకే, దట్ ఈస్ వాట్స్ కాల్డ్ యాస్ గవర్నెన్స్. ఓకే, ఎస్ సార్. ఏంటి మీరు తచ్చుకోలేకపోతారు? అడగండి, పర్వాలేదు. ఇదా? This is the government which includes legislature, executive and judiciary. Okay? This is the civil society which comprises of several agencies like NGOs, voluntary associations, people's unions and so forth. And this is the private sector which contains corporate bodies motivated by profits. Okay? All the three will have an interface. Okay? Through a process of consultation, okay, and coordination to formulate policies, take decisions and enact laws. This process is called as governance. Got it? Okay? So this is what it is, my dear friends. It is an outcome of two important events that have taken place in the recent times. Firstly, the popularity of a new ideology called Neoliberalism, okay, which proposes again that the government should be limited, which proposes that market principles should be the basis for all decisions, okay, which proposes that government should reduce its presence in economy and government should aim at improving efficiency. Okay? Government should withdraw from all welfare activities and government should only assume regulatory functions. Okay? And చెప్పే ఈ కొత్త ఐడియాలజీ వచ్చేసరి దీన్ని నియోలిబరలిజం అంటారు. That was one big influence on the evolution of the concept of governance, and the second important influence is the recent breakthroughs in information and communication technology, which enabled revitalization of the civil society groups in India and elsewhere in other parts of the world as well. You know, can you tell me that in recent times there was a very important legislation that was brought out by Parliament, which was an outcome of the mobilization of civil society. One act made by Parliament, which I would, in case asked, can you tell me any important act which you think is very important in indigenous on a heartbeat? I would mention this act. This act was an outcome of the mobilization of civil society which put pressure on the government. Can you tell me what that act was? RTI, Right to Information Act. You know, recently Group 1 ఇంటర్వ్యూలో ఎంతమంది క్యాండిడేట్స్కి ఎన్ని మార్క్స్ వచ్చాయి, వాట్ ఈస్ ద క్రైటీరియా ఫర్ అవార్డింగ్ మార్క్స్ ఇన్ ద ఇంటర్వ్యూ అని ఆర్టీఐ కింద ఒక క్యాండిడేట్ పబ్లిక్ సర్వీస్ కమిషన్కి అప్పీల్ చేసుకున్నాడు. ఓకే, పబ్లిక్ సర్వీస్ కమిషన్ ఇంటర్వ్యూలో అలాట్ చేసిన మార్క్స్ అన్నీ ఇచ్చింది, కానీ ఏ క్రైటీరియా పెట్టుకుని మేము మార్క్స్ అవార్డ్ చేస్తామో మేము చెప్పలేము అని చెప్పి అంది. అయితే ఏ అభ్యర్థికి ఎన్ని మార్క్స్ వచ్చాయో అది మాత్రం ఇచ్చింది కదా. ఒకసారి ఆ క్యాండిడేట్స్ రిటర్న్ స్కోర్స్, ఇంటర్వ్యూ స్కోర్స్ వాళ్ళు అనలైజ్ చేస్తే తెలిసింది ఏంటంటే, ఒకవేళ ఒక రిజర్వ్డ్ క్యాండిడేట్ ఉన్నాడు అనుకోండి, ద ఇంటర్వ్యూ మార్క్స్ ఆఫ్ రిజర్వ్డ్ క్యాండిడేట్ వేర్ సో మ్యానిపులేటెడ్ దట్ హీ వుడ్ గెట్ సెలెక్షన్ ఓన్లీ ఇన్ ద రిజర్వ్డ్ కేటగిరీ. ఎస్సీ ఉమెన్ అయితే ఎస్సీ ఉమెన్లో, ఎస్టీ జనరల్ అయితే ఎస్టీ జనరల్లో, బీసీఏ అయితే బీసీఏలో, బీసీబీ అంటే ఆల్ ద రిజర్వ్డ్ క్యాండిడేట్స్ marks were so manipulated that they get their selection only in their specific category. Okay, అది బయటపడింది. వెంటనే there was an uproar. కాబట్టి తెలంగాణ పబ్లిక్ సర్వీస్ కమిషన్ హ్యాడ్ రిమూవ్డ్ ఇంటర్వ్యూస్. చూడండి, మరి ఇంతకాలంగా ఇన్ని అపాయింట్మెంట్స్ జరిగాయి కదా, అందులో ఎంతవరకు వాళ్ళు రూల్స్ని పాటించారు అంటే, వస్తే వచ్చినట్టు రాకపోతే అంతే అనుకోవాలి ఇంతకుముందు రోజుల్లో. బట్ నౌ యూఆర్ ఆర్మ్డ్ విత్ ఆర్టీఐ. ఓకే, గవర్నమెంట్ ఎక్కువ ఓవర్ యాక్షన్ చేయకూడదు దట్. కొన్ని అమ్ముకుంటే అమ్ముకోవచ్చు, కాదంటలేదు. ఓకే, కానీ లైన్ షేర్ అని ఇవ్వాలి కదా అన్ఎంప్లాయిడ్ స్టూడెంట్స్కి న్యాయబద్ధంగా దట్. ఓకే, అన్నీ అమ్మేసుకుంటే దిస్ ఈజ్ వాట్ ఈస్ కాల్డ్ as గవర్నెన్స్. పార్టిసిపేషన్ ఆఫ్ పీపుల్ త్రూ సివిల్ సొసైటీ అండ్ కార్పొరేట్ సెక్టర్ with government in formulation of decisions. దీన్ని ఒకవేళ the idea of governance became very popular from the initial years of 1990s. You know, 1990s is considered to be an astounding decade. Astounding. Because of the large scale changes that took place in the entire world. Not only in India, India lo kuda kada, path breaking changes kada. 1991, new economic policy. Okay, we have strengthened our social sector. We adopted new economic policy. We adopted new foreign policy, look east policy, introduced by P.V. Narasimha Rao. Then we also have brought out the 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts to decentralize power. Astounding years, 1990s. India ke kadandi, prapancha vyaptanga kuda, across the entire world also, the decade of 1990s was an astounding decade with so many events and phenomena which shaped our lives, 1990 కి ముందు ఒక ఫారిన్ కార్ కూడా కనిపించేది కాదు రోడ్ల మీద, ఎప్పుడో ఒకసారి కనిపించేది. ఇవాళ మనకి ఇండియన్ రోడ్స్ మీద రోజ్ రాసులు కనిపిస్తున్నాయి అక్కడక్కడ, తెలుసా? సో దీస్ ఆర్ ద చేంజెస్ దట్ వీ సీ. ఆల్ దిస్ can be traced to the developments in 1990s. Astounding decade, my dear friends. Okay, so this was how the concept of governance had taken its birth, right? I hope you understood the meaning of governance and how it had evolved. Tomorrow we'll start with the question and answer format of governance and try to know things from the examination point of view. Stick to the notes, don't try to go beyond. Okay, ఒకవేళ ఏదైనా వేరే క్వశ్చన్ అడిగినా కూడా మీ నోట్స్లో ఉన్న ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ సరిపోతుంది ఫర్ యూ టు రైట్ ఆన్సర్స్. Okay, so stick to the notes. See you tomorrow. Thank you so much.